Most ovens only have heating elements either on the top or at the bottom, and this causes cake tins and batters to heat up faster on one side than the other, resulting in wonky bakes. These are called hotspots, and unless you have a really fancy or commercial oven, it's likely that your oven will also have some hotspots too. The toast test is a simple way to see if this is really an issue for your oven. It will only take about 20 minutes, and once you know where the hotspots are, then there are a few easy things we can do to make this less of an issue. We'll get onto that shortly, but let's talk about the toast test. The idea is to place slices of bread in different baking zones in your oven. And as the bread toasts, it will brown, and the slices which are in the hotspots will brown and burn a lot quicker than the others. To do this yourself, first preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius or 350 Fahrenheit. Whilst the oven is heating up, place slices of bread on your oven rack, making sure you have full coverage just like this. And once the oven is at temperature, you can put the racks in the oven and bake for 20 minutes. And if you don't have enough racks, you don't have to do this all in one go. For example, I only have 2 racks but 3 levels in my oven, so I started off with the top 2 shelves and repeated the experiment later with the lower shelf. And once the 20 minutes is up, remove from the oven to see if any of the slices of toast are more burnt than the others. Before we get into the results, there are a couple of things to keep in mind to do this test properly. First of all, make sure the oven is actually at 180 degrees before you put in the toast. A good way to do this is to use an oven thermometer, or if you don't, just wait for the oven light to switch off indicating it's at temperature. When the oven is coming up to temperature, it's very likely the heat is not even anyway, so this will mess with our results, and it doesn't really reflect how we normally bake. The second thing is to try and use white bread if possible. These are first of all a lot cheaper, but also much more sensitive to heat than brown bread or sourdough bread, which makes it perfect for showing off any subtle changes in temperature across the oven. Okay, and on to the results. Generally, I like to start by looking at the middle of the middle rack, because that's usually where the temperature is most consistent and where I like to bake my cakes. You can see here that the slices in the middle has a nice golden brown colour to it, not too light and not too dark. But if you look at its neighbours, that's a different story. The toast on the left hand side of the oven, especially the left corner, is much darker than the rest, indicating a hotspot. Let's have a look at the top rack. Straight away we can see that everything on here is a little bit darker in colour than the middle rack. This is most likely because it's a lot closer to the heating element. What is even more interesting is that on the same slice of toast in the middle there, we can see both burnt and pale areas. And if you look closely, we can see a pattern that's forming across the whole shelf that looks a little bit like a coat hanger. And I think this is because of the shape of the heating element. And this is why it's important to do this test, because every oven's built slightly differently. Finally, the bottom rack, which is by far the most inconsistent for me. The range of dark and pale areas is a real mixed bag, and I can only guess why. My oven is a convection fan oven, so I think what's happening here is that the heat is being funneled in such a way that it's swirling around the bottom, resulting in many different hotspots. If anyone has a better explanation than this, please hit me up in the comments, I'm really curious. So my conclusion from the experiment is really to stick with the middle rack. That's why in all my videos you never really see me baking with the top or the bottom unless I'm baking in huge volumes. So hopefully your oven doesn't have too many hotspots, but if you do come across these problems, then there are a few strategies we can use. The most obvious one is the one I mentioned already, which is avoid baking in those areas. Another option is to use a baking stone, or some people call it a pizza stone, to help redistribute the heat more evenly. These are great at retaining and redistributing heat, so you can place the baking stones above and or below your hotspots to see if it helps. For me, I repeated the experiment on the bottom layer, but this time I've put a baking stone just above. In my case, you can see that it doesn't completely eliminate all the hotspots, but it does improve the results significantly to a point where I think this is a usable spot. And finally, if the hotspots are very severe and they're everywhere, you could try giving your oven a deep clean. Sometimes the built up grease can affect the way which the oven circulates heat and air. And failing that, you could also always buy a new oven. This is obviously very expensive and should be the last resort. The reason why I started to look at hotspots is because some of my bakes have been coming out quite wonky recently. Cakes aren't rising evenly and macarons are not coming out consistently with feet. So I'm glad I did this toast test, because now I know which areas of the oven to avoid. Does your oven have any hotspots? If so, how did you cope with them? Let's chat down below in the comment section. And if you like these kind of kitchen experiments, then you might also like this video on baking tray liners that I published last week. Hope you enjoyed this toast test. I've been Isaac, and I'll see you in the next video.